I'm glad Ranjit told you that I'm from Chile, because when I first came to this country in 1967, I came to live in Gastonia, you know, just down the road a little bit. Well, they never seen a guy like me in Gastonia, like me, you know, you can imagine this is 1967. So some people would ask me, do you have a speech impediment? And I realized that those were the kind people, because others would ask me, are you from New York? That didn't help much in 1967 in Gastonia. So I went to the Chamber of Commerce in Gastonia, and I told them, look, I need to finish my engineering studies. Is there a university nearby? And they said, yes, there is a new one in Charlotte, but we don't know the name. And so I said, why don't you get on I-85, cross the bridge, and you're going to see the sign. So when you cross the bridge, the first sign that you saw back then was Johnson Smith University, next right. So I went to apply, and they said, no, we don't teach engineering here, and they made me a drawing. So I ended up in UNC Charlotte, which was a very small school back then. It had only 1,500, I was 1,501. You know, and they had 3 foreign students, I was number 4. You know, it was quite a little thing. And when you begin to try to get adapted to another country, to another culture, to another language, you translate. You know, people say good morning, oh, buenos dias. How are you, ¿cómo está? So you start going through this process, and it takes time. And you lose a millisecond, 2 milliseconds, 10 milliseconds, you are lost. You don't know what happened in the conversation. You get into the conversation once more, but you lost part of it, you see. So through that process, I was talking, this is the first week in class, and we are at the cafeteria, one of the boys told me, you have a date. There was a pretty girl standing there, she had been kind of a beauty queen or something. And he realized by the look in my eyes that I didn't know what a date was. You know, to me a date was January 14th. And he said, no, you pick it up, buy dinner, take it to the movies. Oh, one of those, yes, one of those, you know. So, okay, I went and picked up the girl, we went to have dinner, went to the movies. And then about 11 o'clock, I left her back at home. She lived nearby here in Dilworth. And I started driving back to Gastonia. It was a dark night in the winter. This is January. It was cold. And as I entered town, this huge blue light comes behind me in the rear window of the car. I didn't know what it was. Back then there was a program on TV, The Twilight Zone. Do you remember that? Scary, you know. Yeah, that is true, you know. Aliens would come from outer space, they abducted people, they tortured them. You remember that experiment that they did? And I said, hell, I'm gonna run away. So I stepped on the gas, hoping that as I went past, the light would go into space, never to be seen again, you know, like in the movies. And I thought, well, you know, this happens in the United States, and I'm here now. So maybe I'm one of the cases, you know, so I really wanted to get back to my apartment. I lived with another fellow from Chile. And finally I ran, and we were going like this through Gastonia, you know, moving, and the light behind me and all that. And we arrived at the apartment, and I parked the car, and the light pulls beside me, and I look and say, Gastonia Police Department. I said, oh my goodness, what I have done, you know. 1 week in the country, and here I have the law on top of me. So the policeman was very upset, you know. He said, your driver's license. So I handed him a little red book with hardcovers and many pages. Of course, it was in Spanish, you know. So he looked it up, and that just flipped him. He got on the radio and said, Sergeant, I got a real funny-looking guy with me. He said, bring him in. Said, sit here beside me. I want to keep an eye on you, you know. So I sat beside him. He's so upset he's driving on the left side of the road. So I tapped him on the shoulder and said, should we be on this side? Don't tell me what to do, you know. So I came over. We arrived to the Gastonia Police Department. It's about 11:30 at night. And as we walk in, the sergeant has his desk on a big floor platform that looked huge to the high, very amiable looking man in his mid-50s or so. And he leaned over like that, and he realized there is something wrong with this picture here. There's nothing funny looking about me. My dad was Command Sergeant Major in the Army in Chile. I was raised, you know, always be clean cut. I had short hair when I had hair, always short hair. And I had been on a day, so I had a necktie, blue blazer, khaki pants. Doesn't get any more clean cut than that. So the sergeant realized there's something wrong with this, calling this fellow a funny looking guy. So he said, son, what happened? I said, this is getting better, son, you know. What happened? I said, well, I didn't stop, sir. Why not? I was afraid. What did you think it was? A UFO. I told the truth, you know. What is a UFO? You know, like in the movies, something That's the line. It's a blinding light. You know, it's dangerous. You shouldn't do that to people at home, you know. He asked me, did the officer play the siren for you? No, I said, he never did. I would have stopped. What they do in your country? They don't have a light, they have a siren, I say, you know. And then he asked me, where are you from? I'm from Chile, in South America. So he told the policeman, you wait outside. And he came around his desk, put an arm around my shoulder and said, son, when I was your age, I was in your country with the Navy. And I said, Operation Unitas. That's right, he told me, you know. And I was in the Port of Valparaiso, and there was a nice bar. I said, yeah, I've been there. I used to live nearby, you know. So he said, how are the girls in Chile? Oh, lovely. I said, it was summertime when I left, you know. Summer is when it's winter here. And I said, well, looking as beautiful as ever. I said, have you been to such and such bar? Yes, I've been there. Being a good student, I've been to all the bars in the port, you know. And the port city has good bars if you've never been to one of them because it has a lot of paraphernalia that they collect about sailing ships and things like that. So he said, look, it's my break time. Would you like to have a cup of coffee and a sandwich? Well, of course, you know. So we ordered coffee and a sandwich and we talked for about 2 hours about the bars, the girls, and all the things about Chile. He was reliving his youth through me, you know. And I was delighted to talk to him, wondering what is going to happen next. So after about 2 hours of talking, he said, I guess you need to go home now. I said, yeah, I got class tomorrow, you know. So he called the officer back and said, apologize to this gentleman. You disrupted his evening, you know. And so the cop was very apologetic. Was he mean to you? No, he was upset that he wasn't mean, you know. So he told me, take him home and apologize again to him when you get there. So he took me home, and the cop apologized again, and I thought, I like this country. I think I'm going to stay here. You know? I mean, how can you not? I mean, they feed you, they give you nice coffee and sandwich and coffee, tell you stories. So that's the way I began in Gastonia. You know, that's where I learned to talk English. That's why I talk this way. I'm from Gastonia, see what I mean? And I went to UNCC, like I told you, and I began studying there. And the college has been good to me. They issued me 2 degrees and a beautiful wife. And they have educated our 2 children with doctors in engineering and things like that. But along the way, as you can see, I'm a true Charlottean, therefore I have been here a long time. And as a true Charlottean, I have done a lot of civic work. And I think Ranjit mentioned I have been involved with the Chamber of Commerce. And I used to go to Europe with volunteers, lawyers, accountants, bankers, to bring companies to open businesses here in Charlotte. In a period of 3 years, we brought 60 companies, created about 3,000 jobs. You know, we have a good track record. But when we went through Europe, people ask us, what is Charlotte? Tell us about Charlotte. And we used to say, Charlotte means business. You know, it's the only thing we could say. We didn't know what to say about the city, a central theme. What is Charlotte? The German guy asked us, why did you name your city after the German wife of an English king? Who are you trying to suck up? You know? And I said, yeah, he got a point, you know, why did we do that? We don't know. But anyway, the point of what is Charlotte always stuck in my mind. And at the same time, I was involved with another organization called the Arts and Science Council, which, by the way, is a very powerful organization, larger than the Arts and Science Council in New York City, here in little old Charlotte, you know. So we have a lot of things going on here, and we had a consultant from California to come and tell us what should be the central theme of the city, you know, insofar as the arts. And he gave us several recommendations, but he also said, look, you're missing a theme, something to agglutinate the city. You need to lay claim to being the creative capital of the South. The creative capital of the South. And he said, you better do that before Atlanta jumps on it. And that thought stuck with me, and I began thinking about this, that it would be very important to do this. You know, I remember talking to Hugh McCall, and he said, I like the idea, if I was at the bank, we'll do it. You know, once he left the bank, he kind of lost power, I guess, or he feels that way. You know, he never lost power, but anyway, the idea struck with me, and I have talked to people about it, and why creativity is important. Let's go back to the Middle Ages for a minute. Long trip. It's the year 1200. You don't know how to read or write. Maybe few people go. Just a few knew how to read and write. And if you knew how to read, you had another problem. How do you get books? You know, books were kept in monasteries by the Catholic Church who copied. The monks copied the books very, very laboriously with calligraphy. You've seen pictures of these books. Nice colored pictures. So if you want to read a book, the first thing you had to do was make friends with the abbot in the monastery. And then after you befriended him, he said, yes, we'll allow you to read such and such book. So you reported a day to the monastery. They took you to a room, and there was a book waiting for you. But there were also 2 monks keeping their eyes on you. just in case you wanted to dog-ear a page so you knew where you left it next day when you came back, or better yet, read the page and take it like you do at the library here, you know. So they knew that people were attentive, so they had 2 monks looking after you. All of this changed, and back then knowledge was difficult to come by because of the books. So those who knew how to read and write had a lot of power and prestige. That changed with Gutenberg, you know, and the printing press, and also with public education that came together later. So public education and the easy availability of books made knowledge available to everyone. What became difficult to get then was data. Data was very hard to get. Governments collected data, you know, municipal governments, federal governments, state governments, they collected data. How many miles people travel, what do they buy, what do they eat, how much money they make. All of that data was kept in government offices at different levels. So if you wanted to get this data to make a study or design something, you had to go to an office. And I remember I helped design a pipeline in Chile before I left, and I had to go to government offices and go into the basement and get the books and copy them, then take it back to the office, somebody would type them, and then you did analysis by hand, of course, with a slide ruler, you know. I went to engineering school with a slide ruler, that's how old I am. So then you presented the report. The internet has changed all of that, because data now is available to everyone, and you get more data than you know what to do with, and that's the problem, what to do with it, you see. So now in the 3rd millennium, the currency that will enable you to have power and prestige is the ability to manipulate mega data. Knowledge is available to everyone. If you feel ill, you get the computer, you find out, oh, I'm hurting here, you have appendicitis. You go to the doctor and say, I think I have appendicitis. I'm sure you get patients that come to the dental office telling you what they have before they show up. Sometimes they're right. Sometimes they're right. But we have the knowledge available, you see. But the data now, you have oceans of data about everything. What to do with data, that's what we need to think about. So that's where creativity is important. And can we claim that we are the creative capital of the South, or better yet, the creative capital of the United States? Yes, there's plenty of creativity to go around here. First of all, creativity is not only in the arts. You know, when you think about being creative, people think about a painter, a musician, you know, something like that. No, creativity spans the whole spectrum of human activities: science, engineering, medicine, the arts, business, war making, you know, everything that you can think of has creativity. Do we have creativity here? Well, think about, you remember Ed Crutchfield? He used to run First Union, and then he grew the bank, and he had a little trouble, so he merged with Wachovia, and they swapped the name. You know, they actually bought Wachovia, but they kept the name. That was a very creative piece of business work. They became the 2nd largest bank in the country right here in Charlotte, right behind the first bank, Bank of America, which didn't move here because they liked the weather or the scenery better than San Francisco. Bank of America had been an institution, I think 100-year-old in San Francisco, famous institution. And it came here because Hugh McColl and his people were extremely creative in putting a financial transaction together to allow them to bring to steal clear, you know, Bank of America from San Francisco and bring it here. It hurt California a lot. They still haven't forgiven us. And I think that's why Wells Fargo came here to get Wachovia to get even, you know. So we're 1-1 right now. But that's the kind of creativity that we have. Think of Duke Power. You know, you still think of Duke Power as a little electric utility serving the 2 Carolinas. You're wrong. After the last year with the transaction in Florida with Progress Energy, Duke Power now is the largest electric utility in the world. And that was a great piece of creative business genius to get this done by Jim Rogers and his people there. So you have that creativity all over. At the university, Charlotte, you know, I told you I had 1501 when I began. They have 25,000 people now. And they're doing incredible things there. You know, there's a professor doing consulting work for companies in California, how to protect buildings from earthquakes. They're coming all the way across country for this guy to help them. There is a laboratory in a science called metrology. They measure tiny little things, you know, down to 1 atom width. And it's not the best laboratory in the country. No. It's the best laboratory in the world. The most accurate laboratory in the world with the best capability. Why don't we know those things? The university has not been good at promoting itself. So you have a lot of creativity there. They have 3 professors of the year. The only university in the country that has 3 professors of the year in the faculty. You know? That's a huge distinction to have 3. Most universities have 1, maybe 2. They have 3 here. So you have a lot of creativity of work being done there. in the business arena too. The Bell College of Business just got a $5 million grant from the Bell family to explore how to use mega data in business. Because this is what is going to differentiate the data. We're used to thinking of data in the same traditional sense that we always were taught to think about things until somebody invents something, you see? And let me give you an idea. We're all inside the box that we were put in when we were born and we were raised. Like, if I ask you, what is this? This is my hand, right? And then how do you know that this is my hand? Because your mama told you this is a hand. You say, my foot. No, 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 dear, that's your hand. That's your foot. This is your hand, you see? So, is there a relationship between this part of my body that we call hand and the word hand? In Spanish, it's mama. There's no relationship at all. It's a convention, you see? So, the language which is so important to us is nothing but a convention that we have agreed upon, and it's something we agree. We could have called it elbow, you know? This is my elbow. We all be happy. We will know the difference, you see? But yet we accept that as being the truth. And it's the truth that we create. The same thing with data, with all kinds of data that is there. So those who are going to have the power to control the future are those who have the creativity to look at this data, and that's what the university is doing with the mega data, and figure ways to do other things together. So now the question is, if we have enough creativity here, or think of motorsports, it used to be a backyard mechanic thing. Now NASCAR is a very sexy, glamorous sport with billions of dollars spent. A lot of pretty girls around. In the past you didn't see that. Now we have a really pretty girl driving a car now, you see. So that's a huge thing that began like nothing. It was a creative piece of work that got us to be there where we are. So now how can we lay claim to being the creative capital of the United States? What I propose that we should do is have once a year a big festival of creativity, or a convention, or whatever you want to call it, like they have in Davos, in Switzerland, where they invite the famous, the powerful, the literati. We're going to invite here those who are going to be famous and powerful. They are not yet, but they're going to begin here. And we need to invite people in the sciences, in the arts, in business, to come and present things that are different, that are outside the box, that they think different, that they cannot present in their regular professional societies, because they're too far outside the box, like how to take somebody's tooth without opening their mouth, or something like that, doctors. It's something totally different. You have to think different. If you don't think different, you never get there. So we can invite these people, and we also have the money in Charlotte. There's a lot of equity capital, a lot of venture capital that can come and listen to these people. And by bringing these people together, we might create the next Microsoft right here in our backyard. And that's what we need to do. So our meeting, our convention or festival will be known throughout the world as a place where you can come and present your ideas, especially ideas that are far off, and get the financing to make them happen. Imagine how we would be known then as a city that is full of smart, intelligent people that are not afraid to look into the future and are not afraid to change the future, as a real, wonderful city where everybody's going to want to come and live. Thank you very much. Questions? Questions? Yes, sir.
I have one. I just participated in.
I visited the TEDx conferences here in Charlotte. TED stands for Technology, Entertainment, and Design. Started in California, and we've had it here in Charlotte 3 or 4 years. And then I think there was something just a few weeks ago at the Packard Place with Queen City Forward, like bring an idea, you can have your idea be vetted out by lots of people in business. How come these things are not really catching on here in Charlotte? So I love your idea of having an annual creativity festival, but why don't you think it's catching on just yet?
Because in Charlotte you need a godfather. And I'll be a physician with that. We need a powerful company, and in the past, you see, we have a leadership back in the community now. I've been saying this for a while. In the past, we had, why is the city where it is now? John Bell, Bill Lee, Hugh McCall, Johnny Harris, those kinds of people have made the city be what it is. The leadership that we have now, the banks are hurting now, so you can't go to a nation, Bank of America, and say, put up $1 million for this. We know they're hurting. Wells Fargo is not from here. Duke Power has its own problems. So maybe we can find somebody that can say, I'm going to fund this and we'll get it going. And it needs to be a massive effort to create a festival of this kind. To compete with Davos, that's what we need to do. You know, why am I going to let this little rinky-dink town in Switzerland get away with getting all the important people? We're going to get it here before they go there. You know, the guys that go to Davos need to say, I began in Charlotte. That's what we need. Yes, sir.
Can I have a follow-up to that?
Yeah, follow up to that. All right.
I'm not trying to be antagonistic.
No, please. I love a good fight.
Okay. So if we need one key leader or something like that, I've also participated in Leadership Charlotte, and several people here have as well. And what seems to be the topic of conversation when we talk about leadership, like where has it gone? We don't have the Hugh McCall, Edge Crutchfields, those people that you said. It's a lot more collaborative now. So tell me how we can find one person, I'm using that loosely, leader in this new world of collaborative leadership here in Charlotte. What's that going to take?
Okay, I promise I'm done.
Yeah, charisma, you are right, and it's going to take a leader that has the money, the organization behind to fund the initial effort. If our company was bigger, I would put the money there and say, let's get this thing going. But I haven't got the horsepower to do that. We need a couple of $1 million or more maybe to have the first chapter of this done. After that, it's easy. So we need to have somebody, maybe BB&T will do a Ranjit. You know, imagine that, the bank that changed Charlotte. I can see that. So,
how would you decide who and what would be in these creative sciences and arts? Because that's how you sell it.
Yes, that's a good question. We have the universities behind this. I have done a lot of work with the UC Charlotte, and they're very interested in being part of this. So we have to have a committee of scientists to find out which are the ideas that you want to present here. You don't want to bring some jackpot guy that's going to present things that don't make any sense. You know, there's a lot of crackpots out there. No, so you need a...
But that's creativity, right?
Yes, but you need to filter the ones that really are creative and the ones that are nuts. You know, I used to teach management in class, and I used to tell people, think crazy, but don't act crazy. It's a big difference when I used to teach that. So that's what we need to, we have committees to select that also in business, to present crazy ideas in business. Any other ideas? You want a crazy idea, you want it to go viral, I'm going to give you a crazy idea, something that needs to be explored. You know, the Soviet Union is gone. We have Russia now, so capitalism won. Good. But is capitalism the best system we could have? I submit, no. It has been good for us, you know, I benefit from it too. But maybe we can have a better system. And we better invent it ourselves, you know, because we are the only system left in the world. Think about it. You know, we had this bipolar combination, fight with the Soviet Union, communism versus capitalism. Well, they are out of business, except in North Korea. But they're not doing too well. So, what we have now is the opportunity to change the system that we have, or create a new system. And let me give you an idea. When you ask people, what are the things that you value most? Is your health, the health of your family, the environment, world peace, those kinds of things. How do you reflect those things in the balance sheet of a corporation? You can't. You know, most companies tell you, my most valuable asset is my people. Where are they in your balance sheet? They are not. You see, because the accounting system that we use was invented in the Middle Ages by a monk. You knew that. And we're still using the same accounting system. And money, which is a tool we use to measure, has become the dominant thing. So it's the tool that has become important and not the system. It's like if I tell you how long is this table and I give you a meter to measure, and you become enamored of the meter, you know, to tell me how long is the table, and forget about the table itself. So that's what has happened in the economy. So somebody's going to come up with another way to count beans or something, you know. And I think it better be us, because we can suit it to our needs better than if somebody somewhere else invents it. So that's a crazy idea that maybe needs to be explored here by smart people, you know. I'm just throwing out the idea of somebody that's working on this. It would be a nice PhD dissertation for somebody. Just throw it out. That's crazy enough, isn't it? I love it. You'll never invite me again. Okay. Any other questions, please? All right, thank you very much.